The greatest technological bottleneck facing humanity in the year 2026 is not how we generate power, but how we store it. We have mastered the art of splitting the atom and capturing the fury of the sun through silicon panels, yet we are still tethered to the chemical battery. These devices are slow, wasteful, and they begin to die the very moment they are manufactured. Lithium-Ion technology, while revolutionary in the late 20th century, has become a final limit holding back a post-fossil world. We are trapped behind an energy wall, where the cost of containment is higher than the cost of creation. Chemical batteries rely on the slow migration of ions through a physical medium, a process that is inherently messy and limited by the laws of thermodynamics. Heat is generated, materials degrade, and the physical structure of the battery eventually collapses under the stress of use. This is why your laptop grows hot and your smartphone loses its ability to hold a charge after a few hundred cycles. The question for our civilization is no longer how to produce more energy, but how to contain it without loss. If we cannot solve the storage problem, our green transition will remain a beautiful, unattainable dream. The answer to this crisis does not lie in better chemistry, but in the radical world of quantum mechanics. For decades, we have viewed energy through a classical lens, treating it like a liquid that must be poured from one container to another. Quantum mechanics offers an alternative that sounds like science fiction, yet it is rooted in the fundamental fabric of reality. By exploiting phenomena like superposition and entanglement, we can move energy storage from the realm of physical reactions to the realm of quantum states. This shift unlocks a level of speed, efficiency, and durability that is simply impossible under the rules of classical physics. In the quantum realm, particles do not behave like tiny marbles, but like waves of probability that can exist in multiple states at once. When we apply this to energy, we find that a quantum battery does not need to wait for ions to travel through a liquid. Instead, it can transition between energy levels almost instantaneously across its entire structure. This is the difference between a crowd of people trying to exit a stadium through a single door and an entire orchestra playing a single perfect note in unison. The limitations of friction and heat begin to dissolve when you operate at the scale of the very small. Deep within an unassuming industrial park in Vancouver, British Columbia, theory is finally transitioning into reality. A small, dedicated research team has spent the last decade working in the shadows, moving away from academic curiosity and toward functional prototypes. This location, far from the polished halls of Silicon Valley, has become the cradle of the first functional quantum battery. It marks a definitive shift in human history, moving us from the era of speculation to the era of demonstration. The Vancouver breakthrough is not just a scientific paper, but a tangible machine that challenges everything we know about power. The scientists in Vancouver realized that the key to the future was not better materials, but better coordination. They began experimenting with something called the Dicke model, a theoretical framework where a group of quantum bits, or qubits, interacts with a common light field. What they discovered was startling. When these particles are entangled, they lose their individual identities and begin to function as a single, collective entity. This collective behavior allows the system to absorb energy at a rate that scales non-linearly, defying the logic that has governed engineering for over a century. To understand why this is a revolution, you must understand how quantum batteries defy classical limits. In a traditional cell, if you want to charge twice as much energy, it generally takes twice as long, or you need twice as much current, which generates dangerous levels of heat. Quantum batteries operate on a principle called superabsorption. Because of entanglement, the more particles you involve in the storage process, the faster the charging happens. It is a complete inversion of classical scaling laws, where size usually leads to complexity and slowness. Imagine a battery that charges faster the larger it gets. This is the promise of the quantum state, where energy transfer becomes virtually instantaneous and entirely lossless. In a fully entangled system, there is no internal resistance because there is no physical movement of matter. The energy is simply there, transitioned from a low-energy state to a high-energy state across the entire lattice at once. This non-degrading nature means that a battery could theoretically be cycled millions of times without ever losing its capacity to hold a charge. We are witnessing the birth of a new class of energy storage, one where systems are limited not by the scarcity of cobalt or lithium, but by the laws of physics themselves. Quantum superabsorption creates a scenario where recharge cycles stretch toward infinity. In our current world, We accept that our batteries are consumables, things that must be replaced every few years. In the quantum era, the battery in your car might outlive the car itself, and perhaps even outlive you. Efficiency in these systems approaches perfection, with almost zero energy loss to ambient heat during the transfer process. This precision turns energy into something that is as responsive as information itself. In the past, electricity was a raw, blunt force that we had to tame with massive transformers and cooling systems. Now it can be managed with the same granularity as data in a computer processor. This level of control allows for a grid that is perfectly balanced, where spikes in demand are met with instantaneous discharges from storage units that do not blink. The distinction between a power plant and a battery begins to blur as storage becomes a dynamic, living part of the infrastructure. As proof of these breakthroughs begins to spread, industrial shockwaves are vibrating through the global economy. Markets often react to the future long before governments are even aware that the future has arrived. In the financial hubs of London, New York, and Hong Kong, energy stocks are beginning to falter as investors sense the end of the chemical age. Green technology companies, once considered risky bets, are surging as the final weakness of renewables storage is neutralized. The realization is hitting the boardrooms of fossil fuel giants that their greatest moat, the reliability of oil, is being drained. There is a palpable sense of panic among fossil fuel incumbents who have spent a century building a world dependent on their product. For decades, the argument against wind and solar was that the sun does not always shine and the wind does not always blow. With quantum storage, that argument becomes obsolete. If you can capture a week's worth of sunlight in a single hour and store it indefinitely with zero loss, the need for a constant burn of coal or gas vanishes. The economic foundation of the 20th century is cracking, and the new leaders are those who hold the patents to the quantum realm. Governments are moving quietly and with a speed rarely seen in bureaucracy. In Ottawa, the Canadian government has elevated quantum storage to a matter of national priority, sensing that they hold a strategic advantage similar to the discovery of oil in the Middle East. Meanwhile, the United States and the European Union are scrambling to respond, pouring billions into partnerships and accelerated research programs. They recognize that this is not just about cheaper gadgets, but about the very definition of a superpower in the 21st century. What looks like innovation on the surface is rapidly becoming a guarded strategic asset. The race for quantum supremacy is no longer just about computing. It is about the physical power to run a civilization. We are seeing a massive shift in intelligence gathering and diplomatic pressure. When a nation can store energy with perfect efficiency, it no longer needs to project military force to secure oil pipelines or shipping lanes. The traditional geopolitical maps are being redrawn, moving the centers of power from the oil fields of the desert to the clean rooms of the high-tech laboratory. Control over the supply chain of quantum components is becoming the new gold standard of international relations. This creates a dangerous geopolitical fault line. Nations that have built their entire identities and economies on oil exports are facing a future where they have no leverage. Internal assessments from organizations like OPEC have already begun to label quantum storage as an existential threat. When demand projections for crude oil begin to collapse, the internal stability of these nations becomes precarious. As economic power shifts from wells to laboratories, we are seeing a rise in cyber warfare and covert interference aimed at slowing down or stealing the Vancouver technology. The era of black gold is ending, and the era of quantum sovereignty is beginning. This transition is unlikely to be peaceful. History shows that when the dominant energy source of an era is replaced, the old powers do not go quietly into the night. We should expect to see desperate moves in the coming years, ranging from economic sabotage to manufactured crises intended to keep the world hooked on fossil fuels for just a few more years. The struggle for the future is being fought right now, not on a battlefield, but in the encrypted servers of energy companies. At the center of this storm is a company called AON Energy, the entity that emerged from the Vancouver research team. They find themselves in a position of unimaginable power and terrifying vulnerability. AON Energy has resisted the call for rapid commercialization, despite the immense pressure from venture capitalists and state actors. Their offices are under constant surveillance, and their servers face thousands of hacking attempts every hour. Hostile acquisition efforts have been launched by shell companies with links to foreign intelligence services, all seeking to bury the technology or monopolize it. The leadership of AON Energy has taken a philosophical stand, emphasizing ethical deployment over pure speed. They are acutely aware that who controls this technology will decide the future of the human race. If quantum storage is locked behind a corporate or national monopoly, it could become a tool of ultimate surveillance and control. If it is released too quickly without a plan, it could trigger a global economic collapse. They are walking a tightrope, trying to ensure that the rupture they have created leads to a better world rather than a chaotic one. But secrets of this magnitude cannot stay hidden forever, and a public awakening is now underway. A viral demonstration showing a quantum-powered drone flying for weeks without landing has turned a scientific milestone into a global symbol. This video was not released by a marketing department, but leaked by a whistleblower who felt the world deserved to see the truth. Millions of people are now rallying behind the promise of instant, clean energy. What was once a series of equations in a laboratory has moved into the public imagination, creating a tidal wave of demand that no government can ignore. The public's imagination is a powerful force. People are tired of rising energy bills, tired of the environmental costs of their lifestyles, and tired of the planned obsolescence of their devices. The promise of a quantum battery represents more than just a better battery, it represents freedom. This groundswell of support is forcing the hands of politicians who were previously content to move slowly. The conversation has shifted from if this technology will be used to when and how it will be distributed to the masses. As this technology rolls out, the world will be rewritten in ways we can barely conceive. Energy independence will become a personal reality rather than a national slogan. Imagine a home that is entirely disconnected from the grid. Not because it has a basement full of lead-acid batteries, but because it has a single quantum unit the size of a shoebox. This unit could be charged once a year from a small array of solar shingles. Villages in remote parts of the world could bypass the need for expensive and fragile electrical infrastructure entirely, mirroring the way developing regions leaped from having no phones to having mobile technology. This democratization of power would fundamentally change the human experience. It would allow for the decentralization of cities, as the need to be near centralized power sources diminishes. It would enable new forms of transport, like high-speed electric planes that can stay aloft indefinitely. The very cost of existence would drop, as the price of energy, which is baked into every product we buy and every calorie we eat, plunges toward zero. This is the promise of a world where energy is no longer a commodity to be hoarded, but a fundamental right. However, we must also address the human cost of this transition. Behind the glittering promise of a quantum future lies the reality of massive disruption. Millions of workers in the fossil fuel industry, from riggers in the North Sea to truck drivers in West Texas, face the sudden obsolescence of their livelihoods. The challenge of the coming decade will shift from a struggle with technology to a struggle with society. We will need a level of political will and social empathy that we have rarely demonstrated in the past to manage retraining and wealth redistribution. The political battlegrounds of the future will not be over borders, but over how we handle the displacement of the old world. If we do not provide a path forward for those whose jobs are destroyed by quantum storage, we risk a populist backlash that could destabilize the very progress we have made. The transition must be handled with the same precision as the quantum states themselves. It is not enough to invent a better world. We must ensure that it is a world where everyone has a place to live and a way to contribute. Despite the momentum, skepticism remains a necessary part of the process. Critics warn of the massive engineering hurdles involved in scaling quantum effects from a laboratory to an industrial level. They point to the need for rare materials used in quantum cooling and the extreme sensitivity of entangled states to environmental noise. There are valid concerns that while the science is sound, the practical application may be decades away. Yet, independent verification from top universities is confirming that the Vancouver team has overcome the most significant barriers to decoherence. The remaining obstacles are no longer theoretical. They are practical engineering challenges that can be solved with enough time and investment. We have seen this pattern before, with the development of the transistor and the internet. What begins as a delicate and temperamental experiment eventually becomes a robust and ubiquitous part of life. Time is the only variable left in the equation. The collapse of oil's final advantage is not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Fossil fuels survived as long as they did because alternatives could not store energy reliably. But that shield has been shattered. We are standing at a civilizational turning point. The coming years will determine whether humanity chooses to protect legacy power structures, or embraces a total transformation of our relationship with the Earth. Quantum batteries are not just a simple upgrade to our existing gadgets. They are a systemic rupture. They redefine what it means to be energy independent. They rewrite the rules of geopolitics. And they offer a glimpse of a future where we no longer have to burn our planet to power our dreams. As you reflect on this, I want you to consider a lesson for your own life. We often spend our energy trying to fix the symptoms of our problems rather than looking for the fundamental bottleneck. We buy a bigger external battery for our phone instead of asking why the battery inside is so inefficient. In your own life, what is the chemical battery that is holding you back? What is the slow, wasteful process you keep repeating because you haven't looked for a quantum leap? True progress often requires us to stop trying to improve a broken system and instead look for an entirely new way of operating. What would you do with your life if energy, and by extension, the cost of living was no longer a concern? How would your goals change if you weren't constantly worried about the charge in your own internal battery? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, as I truly value the perspective of this community. Your insights help us all see the bigger picture. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay informed as we continue to track the silent revolutions of our time. Until next time,